All right, so we are on to the last topic of topic 8. This one is sustainable innovations. So just to remind you, 8.1 was those big picture things. 8.2 was a little bit about the consumers. 8.3 was design specific, with sustainable design and the difference between green design, sustainable design. And then there was also those Dijkevsky's 5 principles. And now it's on to sustainable innovation. So this is a lot more about energy, governments, and then a little bit about new ideas, but a big thing is this focus on energy. So here we go. Have a look, press pause if you want to read some of the important concepts and things to you consider, but we'll break this down and we'll go through all these things as we go through the topic. Okay, so to start off with, we've seen this before in this clean technology, but a lot of it is about this complexity or these things that happen with sustainable innovation or even sustainability in general, right? One, it's really, really complicated. So there's lots of factors that people or governments or companies or designers need to consider, because it's everything from wildlife to agriculture to big cities to small towns to people to children to disabilities. There's a mountain of different things that people are always trying to balance. So to be able to balance those things with technological solutions is really the challenge. And so it's so complex. And because of that complexity, that's why things can be difficult to achieve. And then along the same line is a lot of this, it takes time. So the time scale is really long. And to innovate and to come up with new ideas, especially with sustainability, it's not that easy. It takes a long time. So here's this project template or timeline, and just so you can see how things change and what happens along this entire timeline. So remember, some of those LCA, life cycle analysis, those takes time. How all that process and products work, it takes time. So that's the biggest thing, is in order to create sustainable innovation, some challenges are this complexity and this time scale. Okay, and this falls into governments and manufacturers as well. We've talked about this a little bit before, but there is this balance between the governments and between the builders, manufacturers. So they both have different ideas, they both have different targets, but it's important that they communicate to each other, and they're trying to balance out those people so that they can achieve what both parties need to do. Okay, so things that they need to consider is, one is industry needs to be, they're always trying to make money. That's one of their objectives, are to make money. But for their government, they've got laws, they have procedures. There's a lot more things that need to be set up in place in order to get it done, because they're really looking at the whole picture. So they're always trying to balance this profit as well as sustainable practices, and what can the governments do and what does industry do. All right, so that's really important to understand how those things are balancing. So a couple of things, that the reasons why it's difficult. Here's some points. There's specific reasons. So one, it's really complex again. So it's really difficult to negotiate all of those different things, which means that it's hard to get stuff done and to have things accomplished. So because there's so much stuff, so many moving pieces, it's really difficult for them to make an agreement on priorities and what goes first. Similarly, there's lots of different parties involved. When it says parties, that's just if it's a government plus this organization plus that NGO plus this person plus that company plus this, there's lots of different people, and again, it's hard to please all of those in order to create this legislation that can make a difference for sustainability. Economic reasons, so again, how much money is a factor. So how can you fit within the government budget, but then if industry needs to make a lot of money, how can they balance out that money making, but at the same time making sure that they are that they're using sustainable practices. Okay, so I think this is one of the questions on the form. So you pick one of these and try to define that or explain it a little bit more. And then the last one is logistics. So logistics refers to if you order it online from Thailand, then it gets shipped from China, and then it arrives. And so how do you balance, because the governmental regulations are different in China than they are in Thailand than they are in the US. So kind of like how Apple does the whole design in California, assembled in China. So because of that, like the regulations, the government, all these rules are different in these different places, which again makes it complex and makes it difficult to achieve some of these legislation that can cover everything. Because China has a very different idea, Thailand has a very different idea of recycling, for example, versus the US has a different concept or idea. Nigeria, same thing. So in order to balance all those things out, it's a challenge. Okay. However, what the government can do is they can do have specific types of interventions. So one, they can use regulations, and because they have these laws and regulations and legislations, the companies have to do particular things. So sometimes it is difficult for designers to make these changes, but governments put on these requirements, which can force consumers, force companies to make changes. They do lots of education, so they can do eco-labeling. They can do different informational advertisements, put it into education, like literally have it in classroom settings, but also subsidies, so other things where they actually have tax breaks, and they have it's called carbon. What is it? It's carbon footprint points in some way. So basically, if you're reducing the amount of carbon, then you get like a certain tax breaks, and you don't have to pay the amount of tax that normally people do. So that relates to also, well, taxes, but you can be penalized if you're not doing any of those things. So if you're not using like clean transportation methods, then they can tax you. So here's like a little list. If there's fuel or how much vehicles, duties, rubbish, all these types of things, and so that's how much taxes can add up to. So that's what governments can actually do to force industry and people to make those changes. So thinking of governments as an example of this kind of top-down, where they can force people or they can make these regulations to make changes. But then there's also bottom-up, which is just small changes to try to make this kind of difference and make these changes in policy happen. So rather than doing global to local, they're thinking local to global and is bottom-up. Okay, top-down and bottom-up. So two examples. This is just like a plant a tree program. And it's a small NGO, carbon neutral. They have this little program, and it's a bit bottom-up action and an agency or an organization, versus Queensland in Australia has this no bags banned since 2018. So they're forcing it and saying, no, no more. That's just kind of top-down, and things are forced upon people from the government. So that's two examples, and as you can see, task here is for you to find one of those. Some advantages and disadvantages. This is specific to the consumer and the user. So this small scale, they can make lots of changes really quickly, which is a big advantage. However, sometimes it takes time, lots of energy on the consumer's part, and you can't reach everyone. Versus if it's top down, big change can make big impacts. Lots of people can be effective. However, they can't exactly control what every consumer does, and they don't always have to do what the government says. So, people can choose to ignore certain things or believe that they don't exist, something like that. But that's the difference between the advantages and disadvantages in top down and bottom up. A bit of an analogy is kind of like kayaks and big cruise ships. So with a kayak, you can quickly change things. You can spin it around and turn it really fast and change directions if you want to. Whereas a cruise ship, it takes a long time to turn things around, but it can carry lots of people. It can go lots of places. It can go far distances. It's steady. It's consistent. So it's kind of like this cruise ship is like the top down, where you can make big change, but over a long period of time. But then this bottom up can make short changes, small periods, make lots of little changes. But again, it's only one person inside of a boat. So just maybe something to help you remember, think about an analogy in a way. So following along these lines of big versus small, there's macro energy, and there's macro energy, and there's micro energy. So micro, like a microscope, is small. Macro is big, like Kyoto Protocol, big government things, big systems to try to make big change. So that's macro big, micro is small. So also micro is like solar panels on a roof. That's a good example. Again, versus the big government energy commissions. Okay, so here's a bit of a description on it, just so you understand about treaties, policies, versus raising awareness, changing attitudes, getting more people aware of what's happening, these kind of smaller changes. Okay, so similarly, again, micro is the bottom up and the macro is the top down. So that's just understand the difference between those two things, and also within energy systems too. So these small kind of systems versus these big systems that are in place. So we'll talk a little bit about these big systems when it comes to energy security. So this is where countries can actually start trying to come up with different ideas or different technologies to reduce or change their energy usage. So it's things like diversifying. So they're trying to get, rather than getting it all from Russia, I think on this slide it talks a bit about it. So rather than trying to get it all from they're importing a lot of these things. So much of it is from Russia. So trying to change where they diversify, where they get stuff from, using sustainable energy resources, and also paying attention to the reserves, integrating, so trying to integrate supplies with the customers, and then making sure that everybody understands how clear things are. So here's this kind of like strategies that they're trying to do: develop new technologies, diversify, making sure it's clear about the energy policies, and then having a little bit of awareness on where energy comes from and how they can split it up and how they can share it for the consumers. Also, this next part is about energy security, where you can also use trends and demand. So like in wintertime, that's what this one's talking about. Wintertime, you can do a stress test to see like how much energy is going to keep these countries warm, which typically takes a lot of energy. So they can see over the years how much energy is being consumed, or even over a day. So right here, this is a day from 12 a.m. to 12 p.m. And you can see how there's a lot less demand in the morning for energy, but then as the day goes on, from about 3 to 4, there's a lot more demand. So because of that, what they can do is they can reduce the amount of output in power factories or power plants, and so that they know, okay, we don't need that much, we can turn things down, but during the middle of the day we can turn things up. So that can make things more efficient, and they can respond to those different demands. Along the same lines, smart grids work like that. So smart grids use technology or artificial intelligence to be able to make changes and adapt to based on where the energy is being pulled from and at what times. So here's some advantages and disadvantages. The big thing is about efficiency. However, it's a little bit difficult to control. Sometimes there are failures or sometimes there are blackouts. So also here, if you want to know a little bit more about the smart grid, there's a nice video, about 3 minutes, so it should help get you a better idea of what the smart grid is. Okay, so that's it. The big thing again with this is it's a little bit more about the government and energy, how we can use energy more efficiently, and understanding some of these systems to make a bit of a difference, as well as top down and bottom up. Okay, so that was the end of sustainable development. You can see there's lots of connections between topic 2. So there you go. Have any questions, feel free to ask. And don't forget to fill out the form. Thanks.